Hi guys, my name is Ryan. I play chess and put my videos on YouTube for you. Today I wanted to explore a mating net, and it's a very, very powerful tactic and a very beautiful tactic. Mating net is a type of pure checkmate position in chess in which the checkmated king and all vacant squares in its field are attacked only once. The mating side has all of their pieces participate actively in forming this mating net. Mating nets are extremely rare and are considered artistic oftentimes, and mating nets are some of the scariest things to face in a game because it means that your opponent is on a very, very high level of tactical thinking. They are some of the most rewarding series of plays because it involves a level of patience and vision on the board that makes mating nets so rare. Oftentimes, as we'll see in some of my following examples that I've set up here, it forces the opponent to sacrifice some pieces in order to simply avoid being mated on the spot. So let's go ahead and explore my first example that I've set up here of a mating net. So in this position, it's pretty equal, and White's king or queen seems a little bit misplaced until you notice this pin here on this pawn to the king. So a mating net, like I said, it requires a level of tactical thinking that's and patience that's hard to just develop normally. But here it's very, very tempting to try to exploit this pin right away and just simply take on h6. And it looks like a very exciting move. But it turns out that the strongest move in this position is actually the surprising c5. Now this light square bishop is able to move to this diagonal, and this creates a very strong mating net in this situation. And what it does is it makes this h6 move not only strong, but potentially deadly in this position. It's very, very interesting from the perspective of king safety and what we think that king safety is. It's not really just your heavy pieces around your opponent's king, but it's your opponent's ability to use their heavy pieces to come to the rescue of the king. And the c5 move right here has formed an example of a mating net that's very beautiful in this game. So for example, if we push here and he were to simply take right here, we could come over here and exploit this pin. The king would be forced to move to this square, and then we could come over here with a check on the king. The king has no more squares it's able to go to and no real way to defend it. I mean, for example, if he moved his bishop here, we could simply just take back and the check would still be on. He could move his rook right here to defend, but this pin would allow us to checkmate him here right on the spot, and this would be checkmate. But I thought this was a good example that I like to set up of a mating net. Let's run through it one more time, because this c5 move is not everyone's first logical choice. For example, you could come down and take this rook right away. That doesn't look that great, but this series of moves right here is just potentially deadly. There's no way to really defend this mate that's coming here on g7, and this is my first example. Hopefully this shows you a couple of ideas involved in mating nets and how to use them in your own games. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple other mating nets that I've come up with in some of my own games and walk through them. Hopefully give you guys a better idea of what this tactic is and how to use it in your own play. Okay, so in this position, black's got a pretty strong attack already on the white king. I just took on their knight on this square and checked the king in this position. So he recaptures with the pawn, and I come in here with the queen instead of just trading queens there. He simply moves his king out of the way to avoid this checkmate right here on h1. So he prepares to run with his king across the board. So that's what he does. I come over here with a check, moves his king to this square, and I come in and use this bishop. That was one of the key definitions for a mating net, is actively using all of your pieces in forming the mating net. So he continues to run, and I move my queen over here. This square is not available for him anymore, and he has to continue to run over here onto the queen side. So that's what he does, and I like this position a lot simply because of this move. This is a very quiet move, but it's very powerful and potentially deadly. It's because it forces him to react. He can no longer go about his business unless he wants to lose his queen. But it forms a mating net right here on c2. So he defends it by moving his queen over here to c7. But fortunately, what I'm able to do is bring my rook up, and now it's an undefendable mating net. For example, if he were to take here with his rook, I would simply come down and checkmate here on b1. His king no longer has any available squares to him, and that's really, when the king has any available squares, that's when you need to be looking for potential tactics and checkmating patterns. So there's he resigned at this point, so there's no longer any defensible defense for him to stop this mating threat. But I like this position a lot simply because of this quiet bishop move right here. He's trying to stop any mate with this queen move, and I go ahead and finish it off. My next move is going to be rook right here, and he's going to have to trade the queen, and I'd come here with check, and then checkmate quickly after that. So this is my second example of a mating net, and it was really interesting simply because he has such a strong attack going against my king right now, but I said in my intro that in order for them to defend oftentimes against these mating nets, it requires them to sacrifice a lot of material, and we'll see that here in this example. So I sacrificed my queen here on d8 because my pieces are working together so solidly that the mating net is almost inescapable. So he takes back with the king, and this allows me to take my first piece with a double check on this king. Double check is a very powerful tactic and one that I'll explore in one of my other videos, but the king has to move in this position since it's being attacked twice. You cannot recapture with the queen or the pawn simply because it's attacked twice. So he has to move, and the king moves to this square right here. And this allows me to come over here and get this rook involved as well as this bishop. So I come over here with a check, and he simply blunts it with this pawn, and I come over here with a discovered check on the king. The king can no longer move to this square because of this rook. He can't take this knight because of this rook. So he's running out of options. He can no longer go to this square because of this knight. And so all he can do at this point is sacrifice material. And that's checkmate right there. I thought this was a good example of a mating net simply because it uses all of my pieces, and it starts to form a mating net that he has to sacrifice all of his material for. Here's my third example of a mating net from one of my games that was very strong, and again we'll see the same idea as before in that they have to sacrifice a lot of material. They cannot ignore a mating threat. You can find that a mating threat comes with a queen and a bishop and a trapped queen and a trapped king. So he takes my rook here, and I come in here with check on the king, and he moves back to this square. And this is the start of the mating net, for example. It's a quiet move. I guess since it's with the queen, it's not really a quiet move, but I'm looking at mate here on g2. So he stops this mate by bringing his knight over here, which stops this square and also threatens to take my bishop. So he sacrifices his first piece here, and I simply just retake, and now the mating net is still on. He brings his rook over here, and I just simply get rid of that rook by trading rooks. The mate is still on, and now he's getting down into trading off queens. And he resigned at this point because I just won his queen and will win the game after he recaptures here with this bishop, and I come down here with check. So when we look at our further examples, find that a lot of times these mating threats come with a bishop and queen connection here. Oftentimes they're just undefendable. Here is our fourth example of a mating net, and it starts off with him taking this bishop, which gives me a large advantage. I come here with check, and you'll notice that the king no longer has any safe squares, so I'm going to keep my rook here in this position as long as possible and try to use my pieces. All I have to do is check them once in order to win the game. So what I do is I start that plan by bringing my knight to this d5 square, thinking about taking this c7 pawn and checkmating him. Unless he wants to lose a queen and take this knight, and I would just recapture here. What he does is defend it here with the rook, and this allows me to checkmate him. He's not really defending this pawn any longer, simply because it's going to be a back row mate, and we'll see how that turns out. So this is check, and his only option is to retake with the rook, and I come back here with check, and that's checkmate. This is a mating net because of this quiet little move right here, and he's forced to defend it somehow. There's no really defensible way, and that's mate. This is a really interesting mating net here simply because it involves me sacrificing my queen. We'll see how it goes, and right now it's completely equal material, but his king is under a lot of threat, and also you'll notice that the king has no safe squares to move to because of this bishop right here, and when your opponent's king has no safe squares left, that's when you need to start looking for some possible mating patterns in your own games. So he starts by bringing his knight right here, and I simply just retake here. What he was threatening is, he wants to strengthen this pin on my queen, but I saw the tactic coming up, and I just simply take here, and he makes the mistake of taking my queen. It looks like a free queen, and technically it is, but there's also a mate involved here. What I'm able to do now is, since this bishop is restricting, this king so much, and this queen is the only defender of this pawn, I'm able to bring my knight right here. If he were to take my knight right here, this would be checkmate, as well as winning the queen, but checkmate is more important. So he brings his bishop right here to defend this, and I just simply come in here and take. See, my knights are connected, and what I do is I bring my rook down here and deflect the queen from defending this bishop anymore. This is checkmate if he doesn't take it, so he's forced to take with the queen, and I'm able to deliver checkmate right here. I like this example because it involved a queen sacrifice and shows my tactic, which I'm talking about here today, and involved a couple sacrifices in order to deliver checkmate. Now we're just getting into some fun mating trap examples. Notice how my king is positioned very well right here, and this pawn and queen are all working together. The king does not have very many escape squares at this point. So he's in a bit of a pickle. Otherwise, I basically have a 1 pawn advantage on him. So he brings his queen to the only safe square to save his king. Instead of trading queens, I just bring my queen here. And what I'm threatening right now is checkmate right here. So he defends that with his queen. And I come in here with check, forces him to move back to that same position. And I move back to a new position. And now he's forced to trade his queens or get checkmated. But instead of just accepting the trade of queens, I wanted to checkmate as soon as possible. So I could have just traded queens and checkmated a move later. But this would actually be stalemate if I were to take the queen, because he couldn't move here or here. So I cannot trade queens in this position. So I check again and force him back to the same square. And he does the only thing he can, which is check my king. I move my king out of the way simply, because again, if I were to take this, this would be stalemate. So I move my king. He tries to run with the king. This allows me to checkmate him. And this is a nice mating net here set up by this pawn. You see that he cannot move right here. This is checkmate. So let's see how that all turned out again. Alright, and this last position is an insane position, and I sacrifice all of my material in order to deliver a mate with a pawn. And we'll just see how this plays out in the next series of moves. So he takes my rook. Check, sacrifice the bishop. Now the king has no safe squares left because of this pawn's formation right now. And that's checkmate. So this is an example of a mating net set up simply by a pawn and a king. But what I needed to do is get all of my pieces out of the way and take away this pawn. Because the king doesn't have any, he can't move anywhere right now. And so in this position, I need to free up a square for this king to move. Alright guys, there you have it. Mating nets. I hope you learned something today from my video, and I wish you the best of luck in your chess. Bye-bye. What's up guys? Thanks again for watching my video here today. I really appreciate it, and if you have any questions about any specific moves or anything about the game, please leave them below. I'd love to answer those. And last but not least, if you got anything out of this video at all, or you just simply enjoyed it, I would highly encourage you to subscribe. It helps me out a lot, and that way you can get in touch with any future videos that I put out. Anyways, have a good rest of your day, and good luck in your chess.